Hi everyone, welcome to the IDC and Sumo Logic webinar, Harnessing the Power of Your Data for Security Operations. My name's Paul Wilcox, Vice President and General Manager Asia Pacific for Sumo Logic, and I'm delighted to be your digital host for today's event. Before we start, let me cover a few housekeeping notes. We look forward to your questions. Please use Zoom's Q&A feature and we'll do our best to answer them during the session. We tend to find that we get a lot of questions, so if we don't get to your question, I apologise. We will endeavour to get back to you as soon as possible after the event with those answers. Also, if you'd like to receive IDC's presentation slides that Linus is going to present soon, make sure you fill in the feedback form after this event and tick the appropriate box. So now that we've got housekeeping out of the way, let's get back to business. It's fair to say that the rapid and accelerating shift of workloads and infrastructure to the cloud, along with the current special remote work paradigm, has forced organisations to rethink how they approach security and observability of their applications and data. In today's 1 hour session, we're going to explore how real-world companies, including Octopus Deploy and RedBear IT, have addressed these new challenges, and in doing so, have developed a stronger security posture. They've dramatically reduced the time that it takes them to identify threats and failures, and they've given themselves toolsets to remediate very rapidly these critical incidents. So we're going to kick off things with research data from IDC and then move to a panel discussion with IDC and our guest speakers. So on that note, I'm delighted to introduce you to Linus Lai, who is the Vice President of Software Services and Verticals for IDC Asia Pacific. Linus is going to share IDC's latest research and best practices, tools and processes in securing data assets in this age of cloud computing. So Linus, we'll jump over to you and thank you everybody again for joining.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Today I'm talking about the power of data for security operations. Really want to talk today about how we use data, particularly in the context of cybersecurity. To start off the presentation, here's a very simple exercise which I think all of us can participate in. This is actually from the famous World War II statistician, Abraham Wald, who was tasked with ensuring that the British Army aircraft had better survival rates. And you can see here in this picture how he had documented, based on actual data and observation, the areas in red where the aircraft had sustained a lot of damage when they had returned to base. So if you were doing the analytics, where would you recommend the British Army to replace armor or place armor on the planes? Would be on the areas on the red or outside of the red dots. And this is a very simple example illustrating how it's not just the need to get data, but how we analyze the data that's actually even more important to get the right protection outcomes. If we make the right decisions, obviously the survivability rates of the aircraft would be higher. If we make the wrong decisions, the survivability rates and protection rates, therefore, could even be lower. Well, the real answer is actually in the areas that are not highlighted in the red dots, because this is a very good example of data bias. And because you had a lot of observation on the planes returning to field with bullet holes in the areas in red, that actually shows that these planes could survive, right? Although being shot in those areas. And it was those planes who didn't return back to base who actually had suffered tremendous amounts of damage in other areas that wouldn't have as much survival rates as well. So having the right data and having lots of data ingested is just one part of the equation, but then making the right decisions and correlations out of it is equally as important as well. And I hope this illustration sets up the presentation for today. Now, by 2022, infrastructure outages and penalties associated with the misplacement of applications and unauthorized access to data will account for 30% of all material revenue and earnings shortfalls. This is not just by way in terms of the penalties that you might get, but also in reputational damage or even in actual loss of revenue from inaccessibility or the performance of your websites, for example, or your transaction applications. So what does this new normal mean moving forward, right? Because now as we return to work, we're still faced with restrained budgets, limited cybersecurity talent pools, the weight of established practices and processes. We've got that ever-extending IT estate that's moving out from our data centers, and cyber threats are not relenting at all. And of course, there's always the strategic imperative to be more adaptive and more resilient as well, right? How are we going to solve all of these, challenges that are going to present itself when it comes to the attack surface, right? Stephanie Napo says that, look, it takes 20 years to build reputation and a few minutes of cyber incidents to ruin it. And how true is this when we try to execute on our digital strategies? In fact, I'll even predicate to say that all of our digital strategy execution must be on a foundation of trust, right? That allows organizations to have the reputation to do business online, but also to be able to upkeep that reputation and safeguard that reputation through a variety of tools, technologies, processes, and governance to allow that to happen. And then you can do the rest of it, in terms of the development, the data insights, and the reach and the scale, of course. So we are moving quite a lot of data and applications to the cloud. In this survey, you can see here, there are so much happening in the space when it comes to using cloud-native architectures or new development frameworks in order to drive much more innovation where customers are concerned. And this has caused a variety of concerns, particularly in this space when we are starting to move more and more applications and data to clouds, right? We are really, really concerned right now about how vulnerable we're going to be the next time they have a breach in their cloud architecture. And almost half of the breaches, as we've found out recently in our services survey, do not get reported at all. So let's take a look at it by industry, and let's take a look at the various types of breaches by industry. You can see here advanced malware. The one in yellow is the largest type of breach reported, and that includes ransomware as well. That's obviously one of the latest concern, and very high concern, rightly so. But if you take a look at certain industries like government, you'll see the one in purple to be the highest in government, and that's the insider threat, right? Because as you know, in government circles, there's obviously they're dealing with lots of confidential information and proprietary information and data and that as well. But then if you take a look at other industries which are very IP or intellectual property centric, like manufacturing and healthcare and life sciences, comparatively to other industries like logistics or services, they are also much, much more concerned with insider threats, right? Because, obviously of the loss of IP that could occur, and therefore the loss of competitive advantage as well, if you're in the enterprise or commercial sector. So this is only can be obviously resolved by a good SIEM solution. But when we think about SIEM solutions, and this shouldn't be a surprise to many of you who have SIEM solutions today, there are still too many alerts, right? There are reasons for not investigating all of the suspicious alerts each week. There are too many false positives, the belief that unaddressed alerts are not worth investigating. There are also a high number of alerts contributing to alert fatigue. In fact, alert fatigue could lead to the belief that unaddressed alerts are not worth investigating, because you kind of put it into the, oh, you know what, it hasn't bothered us in the past, so I don't think we're going to sort of like have to address it today as well. And that could lull an organization into a false sense of security or a lapse in compliance as well, which is going to can be disastrous for the organization. In fact, most organizations today want to try to investigate, these alerts in less than an hour. But the reality is most of them actually do not achieve that and are investigated in 1 to 3 hours or within 4 to 7 hours. Not a very ideal situation. In some cases, even spanning days as well, right? Now, the closer that you can get to a triage situation to be able to diagnose and analyze, real credible threats, the better it is. So therefore, we now arrive at a situation where we need to invest either more time or people in tools, or even drive, the amount of autonomous operations that we can drive in uncovering and surfacing those threats that are the most relevant and the most real to our organizations today. We're at a stage now where we're still spending a lot on security. In fact, we think that we still need to spend more, and particularly around areas such as network security, data loss, and privacy, and even cloud security, right? But you can see here, advanced threat detection is still very high in terms of spending, which is good. But we still want to invest in tools. We want to invest in the number of security staff, and we want to invest in the training as well to improve the existing security team as well. And I believe tools can have a place in this. Now, when we think about AI as well and the use of AI in helping out, there are actually a spectrum of use cases for AI and functional areas that AI can help when it comes to operations. And this comes from our IT operations lessons. So the first area is obviously telemetry and data ingestion, and it goes all the way to number 7 in automative remediation and incident avoidance, where sort of like, if you like, the robots sort of like take control and say, okay, you know what, I'm going to prevent some stuff from happening, and therefore I'm going to take action. Now, a lot of organizations are a bit afraid to go all the way to the spectrum there, to number 7, because it might cause further problems or outages. It might land someone into hot soup as well, and therefore, it's to be not touched. And at the best, allowing AI to surface, some recommendations without taking action on them is probably the best solution right now. In fact, our research tells us over the past 2 years, anomaly detection and response, root cause analysis, as well as event correlation and intelligent alarm management are really some of the hottest areas right now for AI and analytics to help. We are moving towards trended guiding and guided remediation, as well as auto remediation. And we're starting to see signs of interest this year in our latest services survey. So with that, I want to end on this note. When we think about tools, we need to think tools in its holistic sense, right? We need to think not just on tools, but obviously the culture in which the tools are being implemented. And this means our processes, our people, the governance by which we run risk and assurance, as well as the data that we have on hand to make these tools more effective, and to be able to use the data effectively is perhaps much more important, as illustrated by the World War II aircraft exercise that we did right at the beginning of this presentation. Tools, are there to improve on risk and trust outcomes, and we should really try to move away from tools as sort of like meeting compliance outcomes, because that's just merely a check in the box. We should also think about tools in the context of the ability to help us get ahead of security threats in the way that we design software, in the way that we design processes as well, because that helps us to shift security left as far as IT operations and are concerned, particularly as we move more cloud applications and data. Also, when we think about tools, we need to think about it in the context of the ability to use everything, right, that's available today. In fact, these generations of tools are much better than previous generations, allowing for AI and ML, smart algorithms, and intelligent alarming that we've spoken about as well. In fact, some tools come with out-of-the-box analytics as well that are updated because they are based on cloud subscriptions very regularly. And they could be based on frameworks like the Meta Attack Framework or other frameworks to allow for a continuous update process that allows us some of these out-of-box capabilities as well. In fact, we are arriving at a situation right now where most modern SOCs, will not be running manual processes anymore as far as surfacing some of these alarms are concerned, because any modern SOC that's still trying to drive capabilities based on manual processes are bound to fail. We obviously need to drive a lot more AI and autonomous operations as far as analytics is concerned as well in that space. And lastly, it's not also about what's the best tool out there, but how it integrates and plays well with other tools, and also ingest data from other sources as well. That's going to be particularly very important going forward. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and we're going to have a really good panel discussion together.
Thanks, Linus. Awesome insights. Seeing the data you presented, I feel it's fair to say we're in a bit of a watershed moment here in terms of security and data analytics. Please stick around for what I'm sure is going to be a great discussion. We're moving on to the main event here, and I'm excited to have Linus joining two panelists that I've had the pleasure of working with over the days, months, and years as they've embarked on this journey themselves. First gentleman is Kyle Jackson, who's the Security Operations Team Lead for Octopus Deploy. Hey, Kyle, how you doing?
Hey, not bad yourself.
Good, mate. Very good. And second one, Jem Richards, who's the CTO of RedBear IT. Hey, Jem.
Hey, Paul. How are you?
Good, thank you. So welcome, Kyle and Jem. Octopus and RedBear are two companies that I've got the highest respect for. You guys have certainly had deep success in this transformational process. Jem, by way of you actually helping a number of organisations go through this, and Kyle, you've been knee-deep and instrumental in bringing this about at Octopus and also in previous roles. So thank you both for joining. I'm sure it's going to be a great discussion. So let's get this underway. Kyle, I'm going to throw to you first. What were the challenges that you were looking to address when you first started looking for a SIEM type tool?
Yeah, so probably our path is different to most companies, where we were sort of building out a fully fledged security team at the beginning. So we're sort of trying to build a team with a tool as we went. So really we're looking at, ensuring that the people that we hired into the team, they weren't sort of burnt out by endless incidents and tickets and responses, that sort of stuff. And it sort of allow us to have a system that would, give us that early, easy detection or the rule set as we built out the team, because, you can't put a lot of people power in at the very beginning. It takes a bit of time to build that out. So that's really what we were looking for as we were doing that. And what we've essentially done is we've brought CSE in and we built the team sort of around that and sort of grown with that.
Yeah, I suppose calling back to what Linus said earlier around alert fatigue and some of those alerts just sort of going by the wayside, I imagine you guys are actually ahead of that because you pretty much started with a blank sheet of paper. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly. So we haven't really have that. So it's sort of like gauging how much will we actually have to deal with, what's the sort of capacity. And so it's just trying to make sure that we keep that at a reasonable level as we grow and as we continue on.
Yeah, fair enough. Jim, jumping over to you, I suppose one of the questions, and I've already seen a couple of questions come through on the chat. Why cloud over on-premise? What are the big distinctions there? Why do people go down that path, especially today?
I've got to be honest, in 2021, our view of the world is if you're not on cloud, you're already behind.
Yeah.
If you look at your competition and what they're doing in terms of what they're trying to achieve for their businesses, cloud is the way that they're delivering that. It's certainly the platform for that. And certainly from a security point of view, the reason that we focus 100% on cloud is around the automation capability and the visibility and instrumentation capability that's in the box. We if you think of a traditional on-premise world, to be able to achieve the level of visibility that you can get from natively from things like AWS CloudTrail, just to pick on a particular service, to build that yourself would be hugely complex, possibly very expensive. And who wants to maintain that plumbing, right? So when you go to cloud, you get all that capability out of the box. You can draw on that from a security point of view to get immense amounts of visibility that was just never really possible on premises. And then when you layer for us, because we're a small team relatively, we're not a traditional GSI, okay? And we don't need to be, because we use automation for a lot of the work we do in supporting our customers. And so for us, things like the in the box visibility and the use cases and the kind of alerting and threats that CSE brings is just like essential to what we do and how we support our customers. And similarly, that all runs on cloud too. So not only are our customers on cloud, we only work with tool sets that are on cloud because of the scalability. We don't want to deal with customers saying we've got a Cyber Friday or whatever the latest event is. Can you scale up your security platform to support us for that? It's like, we don't need to, because we're using SaaS products to do that.
Yeah, and I think that scalability, or that on-demand scalability, is probably one of the key things that I hear from a lot of our customers as well. But you brought up an interesting point there around automation, and back to something Linus was saying earlier around AI and automating a lot of the functions, especially in security. Linus, how have Australian enterprises' attitudes changed? Because if I look back 10 years ago, people were sort of scared of AI in IT ops. They were scared of deploying stuff, A, because they didn't understand how it was going to help them, and B, because they felt like they were losing control. How do you think this has all sort of changed over the years?
Well, I think because, we've got a lot of out-of-box integration now. I think that has helped quite a lot for the industry as well. You brought up a good point earlier as well, Jem, when you said, in the beginning, we had sort of like tools from the cloud services providers themselves, right? And it would be so difficult for enterprises to build those tools as well. But now we've also arrived at a situation where we've just got back results from a survey that we conducted just recently across the Asia Pacific. And what we found was enterprises now prefer to go to managed services providers to actually manage some of these cloud compliance, and cloud tools that are available from the cloud providers themselves, instead of going to the cloud providers themselves direct as well.
Yeah.
So there's a complexity in tools and the integration of tools as well. It's not just sort of like one tool that is very specific to solve every problem, right? But the majority of tools have certainly helped.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. We had a conversation with a customer the other day where we're doing some other security work for them. And it was exactly around that. It's that they didn't really understand about our managed service. And it was like, wow, so you basically just collect our data and then you bring it all together into the one platform. You do the monitoring and the alerting and the analytics on top of that. And I don't need to buy anything apart from your service. And that we take away by using something like the Cloud SIEM product. You get all that consolidation. You take away that complexity of the end user having to manage a whole suite of tools. Yes, you've got tools providing insights and providing data points, but to be able to then manage that in 20, 50 consoles, it's just never sustainable, particularly with the tsunami of information we have now. And that's where a consolidated SIEM tool just really gives you that orders of magnitude in value.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's bringing that all together and establishing some workflows around that. So Kyle, in terms of Octopus, how has Cloud SIEM adjusted or helped with those security ops workflows that you guys have got?
I mean, to be honest, it's sort of, we're a cloud native company from the very beginning. Yeah. So we were SaaS for everything. So collecting data out of, X number of SaaS applications, cloud providers themselves into one system has made life itself just exponentially easier, because we don't have to worry about, that tool there that has that particular use case and that one there. So what it has allowed us to do is essentially focus on a single tool for security detection, automation, and essentially engineering from that point of view. So it's sort of consolidated all the annoyance. I think at the very beginning we had, before we implemented it, we sort of had data over here, and then we're like, there's some data over there somewhere. We didn't realize it was there. Yeah. So now as a whole company, we go, we know we're going to send it all to that one spot, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, and that actually brings up a sort of secondary question, I suppose, is have you found, and we'll go back to you, Kyle, have you found that in Octopus, a lot of the security data versus the operations data overlaps, to what Linus was saying before? All of this information seems to be coming together to a single point. Has that been the case here, or do you share that information with IT ops or DevOps or those parts of the organization?
Look, we actually take it all into as a single thing. So we don't really segregate it, because we find there's use cases in both sets of data. So like sort of security and operations, you find there's overlaps as well. So we actually end up taking everything we can, and then we utilize it as best we can. So quite often, we will have ops data that's actually quite useful to us. And then we'll find there's some security data that's actually useful to other teams. So we try to keep it fairly, I guess, together and not try to segregate things too much.
Yeah, look, I suppose an anomaly is an anomaly, whether it's DevOps, whether it's you care about confidentiality or availability or integrity. So I think anything that looks out of normal is a security problem, as well as probably a DevOps problem as well.
Even
you guys have worked a lot with organizations that are taking that jump or that leap of faith across from an on-premise environment and gone into some pretty heavy cloud adoption. That sort of brings up a different set of challenges, doesn't it, in transitioning from on-premise and those legacy tools that they've got to what they might be doing in the cloud. Have you seen much of that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the biggest challenge that we find organizations face is a lot of times they try to bring traditional tools that are not built for cloud environments and try to make them work in clouds, but they're going the wrong way about it, really. You should be taking cloud native tools designed for cloud and fit your organization, your security operations around that, as opposed to some of the mistakes we've seen companies make, not so much now, but certainly a few years ago, is they'd take an on-premise tool and try to make that work in some manner in a cloud environment. But the trouble is, in a cloud environment, it's a dynamic environment by design, right? If you're going to get the power out of the cloud, it's not to have a static environment. That's just called a data center in the cloud, and that's not what you want, right? That's gonna lead to high costs and a lot of disappointment. We've seen people make those mistakes too. So to truly get that value out of the cloud, you want it to be dynamic. You want it to be spinning up services as you need them and tearing them down when you don't. And how do you do that with traditional tools? If you look at a lot of the traditional approaches to security and think of endpoint security. So just if we talk about instances and EC2 instances, for example, you're not going to ask teams for your customers to send you a ticket to tell you they've spun up some new EC2 instances and can you add it to monitoring, please?
Yeah.
That doesn't work, right? Because that environment might be alive for 4 hours. I want to know what happened in that environment. I want to know what data was there. I want to know who accessed it. I want to know what it talked to, what software was on that. And so you've got to use automation to do that. And that's where a lot of our work is really helping organizations culturally adapt to what it means to operate securely in the cloud.
Yeah.
So it's taking that dynamic approach. Don't think of automation as just automated response. It's automated discovery as well. So it's providing those kind of guardrails for your team. So I'll give them the ability to do what they need to do their job. And then I'll make sure they're doing that through capturing logs and capturing what's going on in those environments as well. So the main challenge we find is just really, it's not so much you think about security differently, it's how you implement and run your security operations that changes. This is, the techniques and thoughts and kind of ideas around what security means and what I need to care about hasn't gone away, right? Threats are still threats, and threats evolve. But how you do it and how you cater for dynamic environments, that's what's changed.
Yeah, you've actually just given me a bit of a light bulb there, Jim. I owe you. Because one of the things that I've said throughout my life as part of my cyber religion is that discovery is the most important thing. But it's not something that a lot of people think about in terms of the cloud, because you're going to stand up an instance to do a task and then dissolve it, in a certain period of time. If you have chosen, or if you've not warned or told anybody that you're going to do that, then all of the logging, all of the data, all of the insights that instance is going to give you has disappeared.
Absolutely.
So it's almost like a sandboxing kind of thing. So that's a really interesting point, and it goes to the elasticity of working with the cloud. The other thing that I think is important that you've touched on there is architecturally the difference between a cloud native solution and something that's been built for an on-premise environment. We see a lot of vendors delivering a cloud solution, but it's effectively, as you said, just an application or a solution sitting on top of a cloud data center instead of their own on-premise situation or a data center proper. So it's very interesting to see, especially as people move to containerization, microservices, all that kind of thing. If you don't have the right architecture to inspect and generate insights into that kind of architecture, then there's going to be a whole lot of problems. And I think, Linus, going back to you, what are the main implications of that transition or a hybrid work strategy, especially not just between cloud and on-premise, but at home and in the office?
Yeah, so it used to be a lot easier to control, devices and network security when everyone was in the office, right? And when we're at home now, I think I tell my colleagues and my family, I'm basically the CIO of my house. So I control network policies, I control end user devices, to make sure they're all patched, etc. So it's very difficult, obviously, for the corporate to do so now, because they sort of lost a little bit of control over the access networks. They've lost some control over all of the devices in the network, and they could lose some visibility as well into what's in the network as well. So, when you couple that with the threats that are out there, I think the attack surface has definitely increased. So the more data you can get, obviously, from what organizations are doing with their hybrid work strategies, it's going to be particularly important. That's where I think, these cloud solutions will come in very, very handy for sure.
Yeah.
What we see from a security operations of our customers is, the modern security tools that we use now will all do things like, user behavior analytics. So we're not just looking at logs and looking for particular things. We're looking for what's abnormal behavior.
Yes.
What's changed with the whole working from everywhere approach is we've got a very diverse pattern of behavior now. We've got people working from anywhere on any device at any time. And so we've gone from a kind of office model where this is how people operate, and you can kind of generalize in a lot of ways, to a very need to personalize those patterns of behavior, because I may work differently from how you work in terms of when I'm accessing certain environments and where I'm doing that from. And I might pick up my kids. I may work in the evenings on a Tuesday, but I don't do that on a Thursday because my kids are not at school, whatever it might be. And so what we're seeing that a lot of people are challenged by is that kind of how do I now cater for my workforce, which is not only geographically diverse, but working in different ways to how they worked before.
And I'd say, again, getting back to what Linus was talking about previously, it's also about what normal looks like. I think if we go into the traditional legacy kind of environment, we put thresholds on a lot of our security tools and said, this is what good looks like, and this is what bad looks like. This is what normal looks like. This is what abnormal looks like. But normal and abnormal and good and bad have changed in the past year and a half, especially as you've said, Jem. You might be working at night these days. You might be traveling and taking your kids to somewhere and getting on your phone and doing something that you may not have done if you were in an office environment. So that whole yes, no, black, white, detection of good and bad is sort of thrown out the window. What we need to look at what normal and abnormal looks like, and have that abnormal and normal changing on a minute by minute basis, because normal is different today than what it was yesterday.
Absolutely, Paul. I just want to add that that layered risk-based approach is what most organizations are trying to do now, and taking a layered risk-based approach is tremendously helpful, rather than just sticking to compliance, right? Because compliance is just checking boxes.
100%, and risk, I think, is one of the biggest overlooked aspects of security. Is spending your time, your effort, your money on parts of your business that are less important than what may be super critical. The crown jewels or your core database being breached is far more important than your social club's intranet. So you don't want to be throwing the same level of effort onto that particular application than what you do in your core business. So really valid point. Kyle, how much of what you guys do is risk based? Is there much risk thrown in, or is it like black or white?
There's a fair bit of risk drawn in. It's more from like a development point of view, though, because obviously you're a software vendor. So it's really from that early on dev point of view. So we're like, if we build these things, we build this feature, like what are the implications of this? How's this going to affect us? How's it going to affect our customers? Like what's going to come out of this? So you'll find there'll be a lot of people all sort of throwing ideas out and saying, well, this might be a problem, this might be a problem. So we try to keep a very inclusive sort of culture around. People just don't come to security team and say like, hey, tell us if this is bad. It's more like, look at it, understand it, add some comments, some context, and we'll also jump in as well and add some comments what we think. And we sort of come to a point at the end and go, okay, we think that's relatively safe to do that thing, and risk is mitigated effectively, fundamentally. So
So
we're seeing. So I was just going to say, we're seeing more customers actually do threat modeling approach.
Yeah.
So when they're looking, which is, it's been around as a technique for many years, but people weren't talking about it. So because we're now, I think we're starting to see, we've got so sophisticated in terms of what we can do in the infrastructure space. We're starting to see security. I'm really excited to see security going up the stack into that application layer, and we're shifting it left, and we're thinking about it when we're doing design, and not just saying 2 weeks before go live, maybe we should do a pen test. That's gone, I'm glad to say. But we're seeing a lot of customers now talking and starting to plan and actually enact some threat modeling of their applications. And exactly what Kyle was saying, what are the potential threats? What could somebody do, and what would it mean, and how would we mitigate it? And that's a really powerful exercise, and something that is I think hugely important to then building your security controls and making sure your SIEM and all your security tooling actually supports those security controls and that threat model that you've identified.
And would you guys both say that what we haven't done in security historically has been because we couldn't do it, whereas that seems to have changed now, that we're able to consume a lot more data. We're able to see at a lot finer layers of resolution than what we could see in the past, just because of the availability of compute, the availability and scalability of cloud. Platforms like Sumo Logic that can look at 70,000 feet or 1 millimeter. Sorry to mix metric and imperial there, but 70 and 1 millimeter. Is that capability changing the way that we run our SOCs or running our security operations centers today versus what they might have been a year or two ago?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we've got far more capability now than we ever had in that space. We've got in the box analytics that people had to build themselves. As you mentioned previously, using thresholds and kind of static rules. We've gone away from that. Yeah. We've got the ability to be able to dynamically look at what's going on. If you think about the use case or the example I always talk about is things like lateral movement and live off the land. Yeah. That was very hard to detect even a few years ago. It's very, very difficult. But now with things like Sumo, the SIEM is a great example of this, where you can score every action, and eventually, if there's enough small actions, it creates enough potential threat to raise an alarm, right? If you were to alarm on every single of these tiny little actions, we get that tsunami, and we get that whole there's too much noise, and I just missed things I really need to care about. So the modern tools have the ability to be able to kind of look across everything and be able to pick through that and say, what, there's something going on. It's all low level at the moment, but combined, I need to care about it. We didn't have the tooling or the capability to do that. Yeah. Certainly not off the shelf. You could build it, but again, it's a multi-million-dollar, possibly multi-year operation to do that, right?
You need to be a very, very large enterprise to throw.
Correct. And that's what I like about now. We've kind of democratized security. So if you're a small or medium-sized organization, why should you have to accept a lower level of capability and security? Well, you shouldn't. And we're now in that position where customers can have enterprise-grade security in terms of their security operations without having to spend and build a team and build all this tooling. They can basically consume it as they require.
Yeah, out of the box, I think is important, right? In terms of the out-of-the-box analytics, I think intelligent alarming and correlation has really taken leaps as well. In fact, I always look at it like a modern vehicle, right, with an EV vehicle, right, which is full of cameras, right? And when there's an incident, you can almost play back that incident, second by second, depending on the point of view that you want to see it. And and can you imagine from a modern SOC perspective as well, from the identity or the role or the resource that you want to play it in as well, and look at all of you basically speed up triage tremendously. Remember, we know incidents will happen. Let's not live in a world where we imagine there's no incidents. So we will live in a world where there's plenty of incidents. But what you want to do is you also want to make sure that you can triage those incidents as quickly as possible and as intelligently as possible as well. That's the whole goal, right? To reduce that window.
And I think to your camera analogy, Linus, I'm going to take it a step further and say, with something like Sumo Logic's Cloud SIEM, you've also got picture-in-picture. So you can see how that thing played out 2 weeks ago when it all was good and how it played out today when it's bad, and do really fine comparisons between the differences so you can actually get down to the root cause very, very quickly. So, Kyle, this is you have lived this on a daily basis for you, and you've understood about how events can paralyze security operators and analysts. How has Cloud SIEM specifically sort of helped that process? How have you used it to give more finer insights rather than to be overwhelmed with data.
Yeah, well, I mean, the main thing I think, as Jem said, is that you don't have to go and write a bunch of static rules and alert on the little tiny thing every time it occurs, right? So we can leverage that sort of aggregation component and say, well, those little events over a period of time all build up to a thing, which is then more driven to us. So, especially when we're growing the team out, we don't have to be stressed out about, oh, you have to deal with 1,000 incidents a day because those things are all alarming.
Yeah,
we get a handful, right? And that's very handy for us, especially as we're building the team out. And when new people come in, they go, what's the workload like? We're like, well, it's pretty small, to be honest. And so people are a little bit shocked. They're like, oh, wow, okay, it's not just, so it's not death by alarms. It's like, no, it's not. So that's where it sort of helped us in that point of view, but it also gives us the ability to turn around and say, well, we actually want that fine-grained alerting. Let's go and do that. So we're not without that functionality either at the same time.
That's actually, you brought up a really interesting point there, and I've not really thought about it before, so don't tell anybody. Let's just keep it. But getting staff on board is a really critical part of running a security operation across the country and across the region, and no doubt across the world. How much does that impact that? Like, you would sit down somebody you're trying to court into your organisation. So you've got this gun that's looking to come into Octopus and make a difference. Do you show them the tool set? Do you say, hey, this is how we work, this is what we do? And, they sort of see a bit of a light bulb going on.
We give them a pretty rough idea of what we run with, because we like to be pretty open and transparent, obviously to a limit. But we're also very open about what our workload is fundamentally, like how many instances are we getting a day / a night and that. And look, this is where we're at. We're growing X, Y, Z, but we're trying to keep it around this level because we just don't want to burn people out. I want to have great engineers, great security analysts working here who love to work here and not burnt out and miss that thing that actually matters. You know? So that's the main thing.
And Jem, do you find it similar, or is the infrastructure itself important?
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm talking to people, we do talk about what our tool set is and how we've put stuff together. Obviously, similar to Carl, we don't lift up the kimono and give full access at that point. But yeah, I always say to my team who run our managed service, like, most of your time you're going to be working on automation and enhancements. You're not actually dealing with incidents. So I'll share some data. In the past 30 days, we processed around 2.6 billion messages.
Wow.
We've done 170,000 auto remediations in that time. And we've had 78 incidents that people have triaged manually. So that's about 2.5 a day for people to look at. But the machinery in that time has been doing a many per second automated response.
Yeah.
That's the kind of things we can do now. If you'd asked me, if you came to me 3 years ago and said, these are the metrics I want, I would have gone, let's go and get some funding then, shall we? Yeah.
Your ego's writing checks your body can't cash. So actually, look, we're actually running close to time here, and I have literally I've just scrolled through, I've got thousands of questions from the delegates that have joined us. We'll get to a couple, and for those that we don't get to, I promise we'll get the answers to you. There's some great questions here, but I'll just sort of quickly, in fact, do them in order. It's probably going to be easier. But one of the questions, and this is to the entire group here, is how do you address the challenge of managing the security of your data in hosted platforms over on-premise? And I think this is something that I discovered in the early days of cloud, especially. There was a reticence to go to the cloud because people were scared of the security challenges, or the lack of security, they thought, because the infrastructure wasn't their own. Kyle, we'll go with you first. Is that an aspect? But I know you guys are cloud native, so it's not really been a question that you've had to ask.
Yeah, it's not such a problem. We do take compliance into consideration. We do these things, so we don't just sort of go in blind. We do take a compliance look at businesses and what they're running. So we take a more of a holistic approach. It's not like, oh, you don't have that thing, we're not going to use that. It's like, well, how's it sort of weigh out risk-wise with what we're trying to do? So
yeah. And Jem?
Yeah, similarly. I mean, I always say to people, pick your providers, right? So do your due diligence on the provider. So, what do they offer in terms of their compliance? How open are they about their security? Do they provide APIs for you to be able to get audit logs and all that kind of stuff? I mean, we're in an interesting position because we've worked for both sides. So we've worked for SaaS providers
Yeah.
And we work for customers who are going to consume SaaS products. And so we've actually worked with both of them, and we've built white papers for SaaS products, SaaS providers. And we've worked with customers saying, these are the questions you need to ask of your SaaS provider.
Yeah.
So that would be my kind of key message. Is like, just really ask questions, make sure you understand, what they're providing and what their capabilities are, and what can they give to you in terms of, an API to get audit logs or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Things like integration to identity is obviously key as well. So.
And Linus, have you? I mean, you talk thousands.
Just some thoughts here, Paul. We reckon there's about 60% of enterprise data that's outside the data center right now, and some of it in clouds as well. It's very often not the problem of a cloud services provider's architecture or infrastructure. It's a problem of configuration and control. So we've seen stories of data being left on cloud data storage all over the world, etc. Even on containers as well. The life cycle of containers may not be well managed as well or secured. And that's also a problem. So the more you can comply and have life cycle practices around each of these types of cloud resources, the better you are positioned.
Yeah, and I think if we look at, and I think about my 250 years in the cyber industry, if we look at what it used to be, I think the threats are the same. The vector's not all that different on cloud as what it would be in a data center or on premise. We've got access to the same stuff. I think what's probably good about a cloud environment is that you've got providers like the cloud providers like AWS or GCP or Azure, and they're focusing entirely on the infrastructure part of it, making sure that's secure. And then you've got providers like us that are ensuring that the application that sits on top of that infrastructure is secure. So you've got a very robust approach to that security. And to Jem's point, you do have to ask your providers to show you what they're doing. And certainly Sumo Logic, we could bore you to tears for hours. All of our attestations and all of our compliance that we have to go through, and we choose to go through as a sort of security first platform. So that's a great question.
I think people are scared of the consequences in some way. It's not so much people don't have faith in the security. It's just, S3, if I have a public bucket and I need a public bucket for my website and public assets, and that's perfectly acceptable. Somebody uploads inappropriate document content to that bucket. That's what people are scared of. And that's where the whole security automation and security operations comes in to stop people doing that, so they can't actually do that.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
So we've got time for one more question, and it points to something that we brushed on earlier. It's from one of our delegates in New Zealand. Is it best to merge security operations data into a combined scene? So, do you keep your security data feeds separate to your operational feeds? Do they, coexist? What's the best practice approach, I think, to how you manage your data, and is there separation between the different types? And Jem, I think we'll go to you first.
Look, we're 100% in the consolidated camp. You've got to manage that through role-based access and make sure people have got access to what they need and don't get access to data they shouldn't. You've got to be cognizant of the data that's going in, and if there's sensitive data that you mask that data out, particularly if you're in a compliance world of PCI, for example, because you don't want to. Otherwise, you're going to have to make your PCI controls go further across other parts of your technical operations where you don't need to. So as long as you've got that control in place, the power of having that data combined into one tool, and then being able to present different views for different audiences of that data is massive. It really is massive.
And Linus, you're seeing this on a grand scale.
Yeah, I think the trend is towards consolidation as well, because security analytics dynamically provide the timelines and the context awareness, right, in the early stages of your investigation and remediation. And you're now dealing with everything from the data center to the edge, right, the extreme edge, if you like, even with IoT devices. So the more data you have, the more better you are at obviously triaging and, correlating as well. So definitely, yeah.
Excellent. Well, guys, I have to thank you all for the insights that you've given us today and the experiences you've brought forward. It's been a genuine pleasure to have this conversation. I think we could probably do this non-stop for the next couple of weeks. So on behalf of IDC and Sumo Logic, thanks to all of our guests for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this webinar and we were able to take some valuable insights out of it. To make sure we keep delivering events relevant to your organisation's needs, please make sure that you fill in the feedback form, and it'll pop up shortly. So get that information to us and we'll make sure that we continue to deliver the right stuff. This webinar is going to be available on demand on IDC Arena. So if you want to refresh your memory, or if you've missed something and want to go over it again, or want to show your friends and family, by all means, get to IDC Arena and hit the replay. The link and your access details will be sent to you after this event. So we look forward to talking to you again. Thank you very much for your time, and to our guests, thank you so much for your insights. So we'll talk to you again soon, and have a great rest of the week. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. See ya.
Thanks.